You've found the FarrCast, your weekly podcast with conversations from across Wall Street, Washington, and the world. And now here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Thanks so much for joining us again this week. It's the third day of October. We have begun the fourth quarter. We are at the beginning of the most difficult month of all for the stock markets. As the old saw says, October is the worst month for stocks. The other really difficult months for stocks are November, December, January, February, March, April, May. It's true. They're not like any easy months for stocks, but what do we know? We know that the Fed has reversed course. For all of the other noise out there in the marketplace, please remember what we told you a month or two ago, that the Fed is changing course. I heard Jay Powell do the most remarkable thing in his recent comments, where he said we're going to have 2 more cuts this year. I've never heard a Fed chairman say we're going to have 2 more cuts this year. And yet that's what he said. He didn't say we might. Apparently for the rest of the year, they're not data dependent. They don't care what the circumstances are. These sons of bitches are going to have 2 more cuts, whether you like it or not. Well, take it to the bank. I mean, something could change, of course, where they would have do something. But he told you, and I think part of that was political, because we got to, we're right here at the beginning of an election cycle. We're watching the election news. The other news, of course, is in the Middle East that's heating up. Don't miss, ladies and gentlemen, the South China Sea, getting to be a much more difficult place to traverse. And we're going to talk with Mahaffee about that this morning. But in this whirl and maelstrom and cyclone of news and headlines hitting you every which way, what are you supposed to do with your stocks, as they are still doing pretty well? The consumer's still doing pretty well. Tell you what I do. I talk to Jim Iuorio. Jim Iuorio, welcome back to the FarrCast. We're so glad you're with us.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
That was 2 minutes, by the way, Harry. I did that in 2 minutes. Okay, Jim. I can see Harry sometimes rolling his eyes. Our producer, Harry Jennings, Iuorio, he's looking at me like, how long are you going to do this for?
He's taking 2 naps in that.
Yeah. Right.
But I'm refreshed.
I'm dozing off here. Jim, all the noise, I'm still focused on Powell, the economy, and I'm trying to ignore all the other stuff. Am I right or wrong? Or how much attention should I be paying to everything else going on?
Well, there's a couple things. Okay, so first let's look at what the bull case remains. Okay, that remains is that Jay Powell is easing rates. I mean, he in his speech, he said, yeah, just 2 more. And I think he was trying to talk the market out of thinking there was going to be more than that, because the futures curve had priced in as much as 75 basis points more by the end of the year. And now they've changed a little bit too. So I think he was trying to talk the market back a little bit too. But we have to remember there's another thing too, is that there's still excess liquidity in the system, by my calculation, to the tune of about $2.something trillion. Trillion, yeah, because that counts, empty money supply, what it projected growth versus actual growth, and obviously the Fed's balance sheet, buying bonds, injecting money in the system. So those 2 things, that money has to end up somewhere. There's another thing I want to throw out, and I want your opinion if you think I'm crazy or not. Okay, you can look at gold and say it's up 45% in the last 3.5 years, or look at the stocks and say they're up 55% in the last 3.5 years, or beef, eggs, beer, whatever, and just go by the Jim's dollar index, which are things that you actually buy. I'm getting somewhere with this too. Don't take a nap.
I know where you're going. I know where you're going, and I hadn't thought about it, but I like it.
Right. So what if the stocks haven't rallied 54%? The dollar has lost 35% of its value in 3.5 years. Because what my point is that we always look around for bubbles, and we look around for these overbought positions that are scary. I contend that there can't be an overbought position in everything. This is just the guy who's selling you gold or selling you stocks is demanding more of your dollars because your dollar is cratering. So the dollar has gone down 30%, which means almost a 45% increase in all the stuff that it's supposed to buy. So I contend that the stocks aren't even that high. Now you go to P&E ratios and they're a little high, but they're not high in a low rate. In the low rate era, they fit quite well in. So I don't think we are tuned up for some big downward move. That being said, now here's the blueprint. And I've done this on the show before a bunch of times. I have a very specific blueprint of where I'm going to start adding more longs. And that is the S&P can settle above 58.50. It's about 57.60 right now, I think, as we're taping. But if it can show me that strength, settle that day, I'll think the race is on it. And I'm perfectly comfortable with those two bullish scenarios I laid out. But by the way, October's 30%, 34% more volatile than every other month of the year. And a lot of times that volatility is to the downside. So probably buckle up.
I don't even know really where to start. That was so information packed. I've got to pick that apart a bit. So when you say that the dollar is down 34%, is that what you said? 30?
Yeah, sure. Let's go.
Okay, somewhere in there. You're really talking mostly about inflation. You're not talking about the value of the currency versus the world basket of other currencies, because that's been pretty stable, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it, because the other two, it's the euro and the yen are 70% of the dollar index. Remember that. And the yen, they've been beating the crap out of the yen since they had any opportunity to. All they want is inflation there, because they just have that nightmare of 3 decades of deflationary worries. So the yen is cratering. The euro, again, here's my point, is that we can look at the dollar index and measure its strength against the euro and the yen, but most of the people in this country aren't working second jobs and side hustles to buy more euros and yen. They want to buy more eggs and bread and beef, and those things are up pretty much in line with gold and stocks.
Yes. So Jim's saying we've lost a lot of purchasing power for the stuff that matters to inflation over the past several years. And when you hear inflation is coming down, folks, remember, that means that things are still getting more expensive. They're just not getting as expensive as quickly. The rate of price increases is slowing, and that's what's being celebrated. It's not the lack of a price increase. It's not the beginning of a price decrease. God forbid we ever have price decreases. No, eggs are still more expensive, and they're still getting more expensive. There's not, it's just a couple of pennies here and there, not the big jumps. So because of that, Jim is suggesting that the liquidity pool that drives demand is actually shrinking. And these high valuations aren't worth as much to you because that dollar of 6 years ago isn't worth as much and can't purchase half as much. So this is absolutely fascinating. We also, in our market commentary and my quarterly newsletter, talk about the price to earnings ratio of the other 592 stocks, or 493 stocks in the S&P 500. It's 18 times earnings. You go from 21 to almost 22 times earnings. You take out 7 companies, and you end up with another 493 companies trading at 18 times earnings, which with rates where they are, that's in a very normal range, and it's not all that expensive. So when you filter through all of that, Iuorio, sounds like you're making an argument for more of an upside here that is very much investable. And if indeed it is, do you eschew those Magnificent Seven and say, I want those lower stocks? Or are those things that have been driving the train just had a bit of a pause and getting ready to charge again?
So I don't know if there's another upside leg to the Magnificent Seven, but there might be times where I try to get back in. But I have the others. But the statistic you just gave, I didn't know the numbers on it, and you kind of encapsulated my entire argument really quickly, because P&E ratios are not particularly stretched because the prices have gone up, so have earnings. I mean, we're in an inflationary period. You buy a stock because you have a claim on an earnings stream. That earnings stream should predictably be higher in times of inflation if it's a good company. Yes, and I'm saying I am mostly remaining bullish for all those reasons, particularly the one I said about the Jim's Dollar Index, or JDI, patent pending, that is showing us that these are reasonable prices of assets and goods. And again, I reiterate the technical analysis is not voodoo. When I look at the technicals about where I'm going to get back in, it really measures momentum and sentiment and the way the herd feels. And I think the herd will feel more bullish on a move above 58.50.
Jim, when we look and we do our historical analysis, when I do my historical analysis, and I'm wondering, I'm going to ask you if there's a warning sign here in this sort of thinking and data that becomes further and further extrapolated. Because my old question, every time I want to look at it, somebody says, look at a stock, Farr. I'm like, all right, give me the market cap. Tell me what the price to earnings multiple is. Tell me what the growth is. Tell me how much debt they have. Give me a return on equity. And I've got my 6 or 7 things I want to know. And when I think, geez, those numbers are sort of okay, but let's look at the next layer, because as analysts, we have to do that. And then you start to say, well, if you take out the cash, on the balance sheet and you look at it as pared down, or you look at future price to sales, and by the time I get to the 16th derivative to find some bit of good news to convince me that I can continue holding this stock or maybe go ahead and buy it, I probably should have stopped at about the first derivative and not gone so deeply. So at what point, this is for pros and investors, this is a really important question, I think, that I'm asking Iuorio. At what point do you have to say, wait a minute, there's always been inflation, there's always been these headwinds and tailwinds, and it's a mistake to wander too far off of the core reservation here in terms of the data and the stuff that I really analyze, and to quit convincing myself that maybe things aren't quite as bad, or they are. Either way, you can convince yourself.
When you said I've gotten through all my 16 derivatives, and then I thought you were going to say, and then the Fed lowers rates and injects a bunch of money in the system, and everything shoots higher.
Everything goes higher.
So that's why I've become over the years more of a top-down guy. I love talking to you guys who are bottom-up guys who analyze companies from the balance sheets, and I think that that's fantastic. But that to me is valuable, just what to buy within the sector. What sector to buy is going to be determined more by Fed policy, fiscal policy, and is going to be rate driven, because a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's the way I look at it more. And of course, there was the AI theme too. And we have to decide amongst ourselves if that's played out or not. And I'm saying for the time being it is. And depending on the charts, and if they start breaking up again to the upside, there might be another leg in the AI thing too. But to your point, I think over the last 25 years, top down, meaning what the Fed does and what the government's doing, is just about more important to the stocks than the individual, because we've seen trash companies. By the way, to put a fine point on that too, just the amount of zombie companies, companies whose revenue can't meet their debt. When rates were kept zeroed out for a long time, these are thumbnail memory statistics. I think they went from an average of like 5% of the S&P 500 companies to like 12%. Does that sound familiar? So trash companies can stay in business because of loose Fed policy. But for your point, what stocks to buy within a sector, that's a different ballgame, and a very valuable one, just not what I do.
Okay, but let's look at what you do so people understand that a little bit better. Your average holding period for an investment, whether it's a equity or whether it's a currency or something else, what's your average holding period when you get in on a technical basis and have you done your top-down research? How long are you going to be in?
So I have 3 different portfolios that I manage for myself. One of them is just a matter of 2 weeks. It's like a swing trading portfolio. And then I decide if it goes into something else.
Percentage-wise, how much do you keep in that portfolio?
Probably 10 to 20% of my tradable investable money.
Okay. So if your tradable investable portfolio goes up 20%, your overall portfolio, it just picked up 2 points.
Exactly. Right.
Got it.
And I leverage more in the short term part of it too. It's usually options trades too. But like there's a stock I bought. Okay, I don't recommend individual stocks. My licensing is for futures. There was a fundamental case that was made to me. So what I did is, as it broke through the technical level, I bought a bunch of calls on it. Okay, it was a short term trigger to get long, but I'm hoping that about a quarter of that position is going to migrate itself into my long-term holdings through getting assigned the calls. So it's been an excellent trade for the last week. I'm out of half of the calls. I'll get out another half of the calls within the next week or so, and then make the decision if on a long-term technical chart it still looks good. And I think so far it does.
Give me your second and third portfolios. You got your other buckets.
So the other one, like the long-term one, is just the average holding period of that is probably similar to you, probably 3 to 5 years.
That's more of a blue chip portfolio, and
right, exactly.
Forget it, and you don't worry about it too much.
Right, but even in that one, by the way, like if it has a tremendous run where it's not in my rebalancing time, I will buy some put protection, sell some calls against it, just to take some money off the table without taking any sort of a tax hit at all. And I think that's pretty good. We've talked about this on your show too, because I know you talk a lot to what do you call him, Fred and Ethel. Fred and Ethel, rebalancing. If we have a great year in the stock market, and you don't rebalance at the end of the year, I think you're getting out too far over your skis from a risk perspective. I think discretion is always the better part of valor in the long-term trend, right?
Okay, and your third, you've got your trading.
The medium-term one is that's like the purgatory for the good short-term trades. that are in the waiting period to see if I want to move them into the long-term portfolio. So
See if
it's kind of like,
see if they'll work out. Yeah, the short term that goes in the
it's like
long.
a holding period. Like when your cell phone drops in the little thing next to your seat in the car and you can't reach it and it's just there, it's waiting for you to stop to figure out what to do with it. So that's what I do there. Yeah. I call that cell phone purgatory.
Cell phone purgatory. He has a stock portfolio purgatory. Uh, this is the way people actually do manage money. They'll tell you uh, all of these great grand ideas, and when you all of a sudden drill down and say, "Well, what are these three stocks about?" and their head drops and goes, "Oh,
I
well,
used to
I mean,
know.
I finally I've gotten so sick of looking at that damn company, and I don't even look at it anymore. And I'm just sort of hoping that 3 years from now it'll be worth more. I just can't stand thinking about it anymore. This is the real tough part of managing money. Jim Iuorio is a real tough money manager. He's very good at it. TJM Institutional Services, a partner, our great friend, and we always learn so much. Thank you, Jim. Oh, and we're now in season 8 of the FarrCast. How about that?
Fantastic. That's amazing. I love doing the FarrCast. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Jim. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be right back with Mahaffee. Please stay with us.
Thanks for being with us this week. Now it's time to go to our political analyst, Dan Mahaffee, and your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Here we are now in season 8, and as he has for 8 seasons, Dan Mahaffee. Welcome back, Mr. Mahaffee. We're so glad you're with us again this week on the 3rd of October.
Good morning. Thank you, Michael, and good to be with you yet again.
Here we go, beginning of the fourth quarter, final stretch of 2024. Few short months from now, we're going to have to start writing 2025 on letters and checks. Boy, did I just show my age. Who writes letters and checks anymore? Well,
and Happy New Year to our Jewish friends today. 5785, if I'm correct. So
5785 for the new Jewish New Year. Yes, we'll see if that changes anything going on in the Middle East and the Israeli war. It doesn't seem to. There were attacks overnight, more attacks, not on Israel, but by Israel overnight. We'll watch and continue there. We're going to talk about that this morning, Dan, and we need to talk about what's going on with this war in the Middle East. We need to follow up on Ukraine. We need to talk about China and what's going on in the South China Sea. Quickly, in the U.S., it seems that these reports about which horse is ahead in this presidential race change by the minute. And both, it's funny, even though Kamala Harris's numbers seem to be slightly better than President Trump's, she insists that she's the underdog. And even though Kamala Harris's numbers seem to be slightly better than President Trump exists that we're winning this by a huge margin. So I'm not getting a straight story from either side. And therein lies the story of American politics in general. What's going on, and did the vice presidential debate matter at all? But for that final question, people are making a big deal of that final question.
I think the vice presidential debate was at least one where both candidates held to the Hippocratic oath of politics. They did no harm to the ticket. In the end, I think this doesn't do too much. The only thing of note to me is that Walz's numbers and likability among Republicans actually improved. The biggest number out of that, but I still don't think there's going to be many Republicans who come in and say, I'm changing my vote because of the vice presidential ticket or debate.
Does anybody change their vote from the vice presidential ticket or debate?
I doubt it. When
we watched, I watched with my 2 adult children who are both in their 30s, and our first feeling was that J.D. Vance was winning, number one. And number 2, given the issues and the responses and the somewhat collegial nature of the debate, we thought, geez, we don't really love either one of these candidates, but we would much prefer that they were the candidates for president.
Well, it was a reminder of what politics existed like pre-2015.
Yes,
a debate that existed before President Trump went down that escalator. So you see how the issues are handled differently. The way they addressed each other was different. It did seem to be much more adult, shall we say.
It was almost respectful, which we're just not used to in American politics anymore, I think. It was very odd.
It's just 2 Midwesterners. What are you going to do?
Dan, is there a change here? Is there a change in what you expect, and do you have an expectation?
I don't see any change in it right now, as you use the horse racing metaphor. Nose and nose as we're approaching this finish line. The Harris camp, you look at the polls, they need to be pulling above 50% to be comfortable. I think that's why you keep hearing them talk like they're the underdog, because they're coming. These averages are showing 49, 50. These national leads are 3 to 4%. If you look at how that translates, those are ties in swing states. It's how the demography of the swing states works and how the flip voters work there. Surprises, I think we'll see. Look, it's the geopolitical always. I think we're going to have a laundry list to go through there shortly. But on the domestic side, I think the Harris campaign will continue to focus on its message, if not policy details. Absent, though, any further debate between the two, I think it's what kind of statements come from President Trump. What do the rallies do? What can he do to try and keep the attention on himself, even though we're not seeing the same tempo as in previous elections? Will we hear darker, harsher rhetoric like we've started to hear in some ways? But how will that play with the electorate as we get closer to it? Because the one thing you still see in my final bit of domestic analysis, even among Trump supporters, there is Trump fatigue.
There's Trump fatigue. Hell, Trump seems to be showing Trump fatigue. All right, Dan, we've been talking about this, and let's just move quickly. Kamala Harris wins the popular vote. Donald Trump wins the Electoral College. Is that still your call?
Still not my call, but I do want folks to be aware that that outcome is out there, and some of the polling does suggest it. In the end, though, each one of these scenarios, frankly, it's going to be us watching, I believe, Pennsylvania for days after the election.
If that is not your call, what is your call?
My call is right now that the Harris does win narrowly, but disputed.
Narrowly, but disputed. I think, and I said it over the FarrCast all summer long, I think that she had one choice for a vice presidential candidate, and it was Shapiro from Pennsylvania. It was the only logical choice I thought she should make, and she didn't. And I think she may, if she doesn't win, to me, that should be her biggest regret. Now look, I'm the armchair guy here. This is not my fort.
But I do want to be clear to the listeners, the most likely case for a Trump victory, if you just look at the polling, would still be that he wins the Electoral College, but does not prevail in the popular vote. And what that does for, again, the legitimacy, the types of protests you caution that you would see about this.
Take me to Israel, please, Dan. What's going on?
In Israel, what we certainly see is the effect of the defensive coalition and the equipment they have, that this Iranian salvo of about 180 missiles was shot down with only one casualty, unfortunately a Palestinian in the West Bank, on Israeli soil. Most of this was unsuccessful despite the if not decades of talking about the Iranian missile program and the threat that it posed, these missile defenses and the intelligence coalition that held. What we also see is Israel pursuing its war against Hezbollah, which we have to understand is a war that the Israelis have been planning since 2006, and their last unsuccessful war against Hezbollah. The war you saw in Gaza against Hamas was a strategic surprise. The war against Hezbollah is one they've been knowing they would have to fight for years. And what we've seen in everything from the pager attacks to the airstrikes, this type of air campaign and now the invasion into Lebanon illustrate that the Israelis are executing a plan they've had for some time, and certainly doing so in a way that shows they've had intelligence inside Hezbollah.
It looks like from maybe it's the press, maybe it's the media that I watch and I read a lot of it and different sources. But it doesn't look like Israel is suffering any significant losses. And in fact, it looks like Hezbollah and Hamas have taken serious losses, and thousands of people have been killed. Am I got it wrong?
No, you see that. I caution now that the Israelis have begun that ground incursion into Lebanon. As we know from fighting in places like Fallujah and Mosul, And as the Israelis know from fighting in Gaza, when you move into the enemy territory and you're fighting on the ground, a lot of your technological advantages are for naught. You're fighting much like our grandparents did in the Pacific and Europe at that point.
So this nature, as you were saying, Dan, of the hand-to-hand war, the mano a mano war, which is what mano a mano means, by the way, folks. The hand-to-hand war is a very ugly thing and often very difficult to measure. So I get that. How does this end, and what happens now that Israel goes back into Iran proper now, and what will they take out? And listen, as I've said on the FarrCast before, we've been putting up with with Iran swatting at the U.S. since I was a kid. Jimmy Carter and the hostage rescue and the everything. This has been going on forever. I'm sitting here going, hey, please, please, Israel, go over, take out the nukes, take out this, kneecap these folks, because they've done nothing but cause problems my entire life, and they keep doing it.
There's certainly a sentiment towards that. There's an argument for that. At the same time, the question with their nuclear program is if you hit it now, you would have to get all of it, because if you don't, they would move as quickly as they can to build a nuke, test it, and demonstrate that they can deter some other nation by having it.
But I keep hearing it's going to be some sort of limited response, and that's not what Israel's going to do, and the U.S. is going to talk them back to a much more, okay, fine position.
Well, look, you could do quite a bit of damage still to oil refineries, oil fields, infrastructure, power, other economic levers you could hit, but you have to balance that with how do you affect the regime in a way that perhaps inspires the Iranian people to revolt. Look, the regime is not popular. There's even some within, according to the reporting, some within the military question why the hardliners have provoked Israel like they have. But the Iranian hardliners sit in a position, if you look at it from their standpoint, they're trying to thread the needle of how do they attack Israel without provoking full-blown war with the United States. And that's the question of, do you close that needle for them permanently and say that this is the final retaliation? But certainly for them, they see their groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis are okay, but the other two being rolled up, and they don't have the same feeling of deterrence and security over Israel that they once had.
Well, it seems like this is the crisis that should not be wasted. When resolution perhaps is within the grasp, or something material is possible here.
Well, look, knowing the history of organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, and what they did to the American Marines, not shedding any tears about their losses. In the long run, though, the flattening of Gaza, the damage, hopefully not too much to Lebanon, the refugee crises, all of those make it harder, though, in the end, for us to answer that question, Michael, of when and how will this end? Because all you are doing is creating the future cycles of hatred that will fuel this.
Okay. I've got, we're way over time, Dan. I can't believe it. Talk to me about China and what's going on in the South China Sea. This is getting hotter in the South China Sea. And what does that mean?
Yeah, certainly in the South China Sea, we see more of this kind of confrontation. I think even pushing into the election, you'll see what the Chinese try and force, particularly though, trying to look at our allies like the Philippines. Can they push them away? Can they look to some of the domestic politics in South Korea and Japan to force a bigger wedge between the U.S. and important allies in the region? So you're going to see China do that. At the same time, though, we're seeing China's economic story, the stimulus package. They're recognizing they're having the trouble getting the economy off the mat. The housing market, financial side, sure, they're looking at that. Longer run, though, some of these matters like youth unemployment, the makeup of the economy, Xi Jinping's vision compared to what the Chinese people want, still not syncing up.
Okay. We're going to watch this happen. But right now, when they have stimulus in China, folks, it means that their economy's not doing well, right? They're reaching for the drugs. They're reaching for the paddles. They're trying to help the economy. They are going. So this is good. Everything that Xi Jinping has done has destroyed the Chinese economy. most everything. He doesn't like capitalism. He has an ideal. Well, if you don't have a strong economy, you can give up on your ideals. I've been saying it all along. This guy just won't learn the lesson. And if they're actually going to start stimulating over there, they will create commerce and activity that will benefit the United States, despite what they're doing to increase tensions in the South China Sea. But we have to pay attention to that. It's one thing for the U.S. to proxy fight Iran. It's another thing to go into a head-on conflict with China, and they're forcing the issue. They're increasing the heat. Dan Mahaffee, Vice Chairman of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, also with the Center of the President's Study of the Presidency in Congress, our senior political analyst on the FarrCast, now in Season 8. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Michael. Take care.
We're going to be right back with Les Munson, another Washington insider who's going to talk to us about what's going on internationally, how this is all going to affect markets. As on the FarrCast, we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. When we come back, please stay with us.
Michael Farr and the FarrCast are proud to support Heroes, Inc. Heroes supports the spouses and children of law enforcement officers and firefighters who gave their lives in the line of duty to the greater Washington, D.C. community. Their singular goal is to honor the supreme sacrifice made by these individuals by caring for their families. Heroes' work begins within 24 hours of the tragic loss and continues indefinitely. We invite you to learn more about Heroes' mission at heroes.org. We hope that you will consider supporting Heroes as they endeavor to honor those who protect us. That's heroes.org. Heroes, here for you, here for good. And now, back to the FarrCast and your host, Michael Farr. We appreciate you listening into the FarrCast this week. And now to introduce this week's special guest, here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast, now in Season 8. Can you believe it? Jeez, it's exciting. I told you we were going to get lucky this morning. We've got Les Munson back. He's the co-head of the International Practice Group lobbying group at the BGR Group. It's a firm in Washington, D.C. He's the guy you see to get it done, particularly on some pretty cool international issues. He's got a background in government on both sides, inside and outside of government. And has been with us before. We always learn so much. He's done policy issues, too, at the National Security Institute. So we love talking to you. Les, welcome back to Season 8 of the FarrCast.
Thanks, Michael. I'm here for the policy, but I'm going to take away all the jokes.
Oh, okay. We were telling jokes ahead of time, folks, before we came on. And they are absolutely all jokes that I cannot repeat. So there you go. I was asked a couple of years ago, Les, believe it or not, it was a young man called me from Sewanee, which is where I went to school, and I was on the board, and I'm a faithful alum. And I'd met this young man down there, and a remarkable young man. And he was had been selected as a finalist for a Rhodes Scholarship to become a Rhodes Scholar, which is a very, very big deal, very prestigious. Phi Beta Kappa is one thing. Rhodes Scholar is a whole different. Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar, by the way. So he had
Christopherson, the late Chris Christopherson.
Yes, wasn't he? Yeah, amazing. And he said there is an international worldview that I have to have, Mr. Farr. Would you coach me on the world view? And I thought, will I coach you on the world view? Will I coach you on the world view? Now, maybe when I go to Sewanee, Tennessee, I look worldly. But what I did, Les, was an around the horn. And I said, let me explain what's going on at that point in the UK with Brexit and why this matters throughout Europe and where Europe ranks economically with the U.S., Mexico, Canada, China, Eastern Europe, South America. Let me go on to this conflict that's developing in the Ukraine and explain why, with grain and oil that's interconnected with supply chains. And China is now putting pressure over on Taiwan. And then you move further to the Middle East. And here's what's happening in Israel, what Iran is doing, and why we have a conflict. And at that point, I think I was probably also talking about Iraq and Iran and other issues in that region, how they were all interlaced. And what I'd like with that background is to start with you this morning. We've been talking domestic stuff with Mahaffee, of course, and some international stuff. But we hear the presidential candidates largely avoiding these international issues, other than Donald Trump can solve them all. He's assured us within minutes of becoming president.
It's a good plan.
The conflict
It's a very
that's
good
been
plan.
going on for thousands of years in the Middle East, Trump's going to solve. Now, not in the last 4 years when he was president, but he's going to do it in the next one. So tell me, prioritize, will you, which of these world issues has your attention, not because it's in the headlines, but because of its gravity?
So Michael, what a wonderful intro and terrific school, Sewanee, University of the South.
I'm going to be going
stuff.
back in a month for my 40th reunion. I can't wait. I love that place.
You're young. You look so much younger than that.
Uh-huh.
So I think the thing that is fascinating to watch is what China is doing with respect to these other conflicts that we're seeing in the Middle East and in Ukraine. For several years, China had been cozying up to Vladimir Putin and the Russians, had been saying things about the Middle East that were antithetical to what the U.S. was trying to achieve. And now it's kind of toned down its rhetoric a little bit. Things are starting to get complicated for China's ad hoc, and I do think it's ad hoc, alliance with Moscow and Tehran. They're seeing what's happening on the ground in Gaza, in Lebanon, where Israel has, after the tragedy and horrific scenes from October 7th last year, has really recovered and is now on its front foot and is deciding what the agenda is. China has backed off some of its rhetoric and is taking a slightly different approach. And that's important for the U.S. because at the end of the day, our national interests are more at stake in the relationship with China than anything else. That is the premier issue in national security and our foreign policy. And it's the thing that in the long run, we need to get right, or there are going to be severe consequences for us. And so as we see these crises play out, we've seen some, and this is going to sound like I'm maybe tilting in favor of the current administration, which I don't really mean to do, but that these events are ratifying the U.S. approach to the world of building relationships based on values, building relationships that can sustain difficult times, that are not just about what is best for us in the next week or 2 weeks, and is something that's going to be sustainable, and dealing with governments that respect the rights and will of their people while also being effective in the world. And I know this is, and I guess what I'm saying here is, Michael, the approach of being in the democratic world and representative government, which people saw as a weak spot for the United States just a year or two ago, I think is ending up as a real strength. And I think China, which is now having, of course, all of these economic troubles and real challenges domestically with growth and debt and things like that, are starting to realize that this approach of the United States has a lot more sustainability than they realized. And so the longer term prospects for the U.S. look better, even as we're dealing with real intense and acute crises in the Middle East and in Ukraine.
Which is the hottest spot? Which worries you most?
Well, I have to say Iran, because I think both Ukraine and the Middle East are of concern, and Ukraine could be coming to a head here with Zelensky actually taking some Russian territory, perhaps setting up a negotiation that could lead to a positive outcome. And that's going to be very tense and very difficult and hard to do, despite the assurances from some of our national leaders that they can do it very quickly. I don't think they can. But the Middle East, you've got Iran with a nascent nuclear weapons program that may be very close to producing a weapon. You've got a very aggressive Israel, properly so in many ways, that perhaps thinks it can take a dispositive action here that will really eliminate the threat from Iran. I'm not sure that's really a doable thing, and I worry about the temptation there of going too far in what has been a real series of victories for the Israelis in the Middle East, and kudos to them. They've really achieved a lot of things no one thought they could. But the situation now with this broader conflict they've had with Iran that we've been part of for decades could be coming to a head very soon. I think it needs to be managed very well. I worry that our commander-in-chief is not as capable as he could be, given health concerns, and that his team, while it has some real strengths and some real talent, is going to be limited by the ability of the top guy to be involved here.
So are we in a holding pattern until we get a new competent president here?
I think we would like to be. I'm not sure we can be, because we're not going to get a new chief executive for 4 months or so. I guess 3.5 months. So that's a long time in the Middle East. I know this conflict's really been going on for 3,000 years, as we were talking about before we started recording, but the next 3 months are going to be pretty critical. Heck, the next 72 hours could be critical.
So I've said a couple of things to Mahaffee. One, why are we going to squander another opportunity to do something more devastating to Iran? If we can take out nuclear facilities, if we can really cripple anything that makes Iran dangerous, including the leadership in their regime that are not loved by the Iranian people, are we just going to put a Band-Aid on this and be dealing with it still for the I've dealt with it my whole life. They've been swatting at some part of the world to get at the United States my entire life. Why do we continue to put up with it? And will we squander this particular crisis, according to Churchill?
Michael, I'm going to say something that's going to irritate my more hawkish friends. I think what we really want is a pretty good Band-Aid right now. The idea that we can take action
just irritated me. I'll put me in the list. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I feel bad. But I think the idea that we could take action that will result in regime change in Iran is not realistic. It would take such an effort by us that we would be embroiled in a land war in Asia, which you may have noticed over the last 25 years tends to not turn out exactly the way we want.
No, we're not doing that again.
And so modesty, moderation, a willingness to put let's make it an effective Band-Aid, but it's got to be a Band-Aid. And yes, there is some rumblings in Iran, people dissatisfied with the regime and that kind of thing. That's terrific. Let the Iranian people sort that out. But I think the idea that we can go in and change the calculus with a few pinprick strikes is not realistic. And we need to be thinking very hard-eyed about our commitments in the region and work in concert as much as we can with the Israelis. We should be thinking about massive economic sanctions on Iran. We had a pretty good, tough sanctions regime on them in the beginning of the Obama administration and during the Trump administration. Let's go back to that before we try anything on the military side.
Why is a Band-Aid a good idea? Why can't we do at least, why can't we take away their nuclear capabilities in what we're doing here? That's more than a Band-Aid.
Michael, we've done it before. Stuxnet, which was the computer virus, really pushed back the Iranian military nuclear weapons program by years. That was during the Obama administration. U.S. probably working with Israel to get that done. But it didn't stop it. It just delayed it. Anything we do would just be a delay. And there are times when you're going to want to delay it. If we think we need to delay it, okay, that's a tough decision we're going to have to take. But in the long run, our best option, in my view, is let's go back to economic sanctions. Let's punish these guys. Let's put the squeeze on the leaders. Give the folks who are really agitating for positive democratic change in Iran something to work with. I think that's the better long-term play.
Les, for the attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon, how are the Lebanese reacting? I mean, we know what's happened in Gaza and we know what's happened in Palestine. Lebanon being involved feels a bit more odd.
It's a very different situation, Michael. And I think one of the things people don't really realize is that the rest of the Lebanese polity, the other Lebanese who are not Hezbollah, love what Israel is doing to Hezbollah. Yes, there's a lot of regret over the consequences of some of these actions for sure. And these are deadly things. but the Lebanese hate Hezbollah, and they are thrilled that Israel is finally taking action that could lead to Hezbollah being out of their lives.
Are members of Hezbollah Lebanese?
Many of them are, and many of them are not. It would not be incorrect to think of the presence of Hezbollah in Lebanon as an Iranian invasion that's been going on for the last 40 years. This is a foreign power in Tehran imposing its will in a country hundreds of miles away from it in Lebanon. And the Israelis, had their own issue when they were occupying parts of southern Lebanon, to be sure. But now it's Hezbollah that is occupying it, and that is anathema to the rest of the Lebanese citizens.
That's fascinating. Okay, I'm gonna switch on you out of left field here. I am not advocating what I'm about to suggest in domestic politics, but given what Les just said about him being concerned about what we may or may not do or be able to do, given Joe Biden in a bit of a holding pattern, to me, something of a brilliant strategy for the Democrats would be to have Joe Biden resign as president right now as president, and make Kamala Harris take the oath of office with the Chief Justice, the Bible, the American flags, and have her stand up and read as president of the United States. It accomplishes the first woman president thing. It does all of that stuff. Joe Biden gets to take credit, but I think it overwhelmingly moves her into view in the eyes of the American people and voting public, and could throw the election for the Democrats. I'm not telling you that that's what I want. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't start texting me. I know some of you actually have my cell phone number. I know that because I get your texts. I'm just suggesting that would be an effective strategy, and Munson actually knows better. Would that work?
Well, it'd be a gamble, and I think there is a logic to it. I am very concerned, and I say this with respect for the president, that his capacity to lead right now is not really what we need. It is not what it should be. We do have an issue there, and should he hand it off to the vice president, it'd be very risky. Every little move, because you'd essentially have to suspend, probably without saying it, but you'd have to suspend her campaign, and she would have.
But you're in the last 30 days. How much is her campaign going to matter right now anyway?
Michael, this thing is going to come to. This is a basketball game. This is where the advantage is flipping back and forth between the teams depending on who took the last shot, and so whoever wins that last possession is going to win this game. I think this is a 50-50 election. We could not be more evenly divided. Who's going to get out the vote better in Pennsylvania and Michigan? It's going to come out to those who can get that extra 10,000 people to show up that we didn't think were going to show up in central Pennsylvania or in the suburbs of Detroit. That's what's going to matter.
Who wins this election?
I think right now it's going to be Kamala. And that's why she's probably not going to be assuming the duties of commander-in-chief before November 5th. I think they think they're going to win.
Final question. I can't believe we're out of time. I always learn so much when you're on, and we're out of time. Les, what's keeping you awake at night most right now?
Well, aside from all of the stuff that we've already discussed, I will give you one. Chaos in Mexico. We've got
chaos in Mexico.
Chaos in Mexico. We've got I'm trying to think of something we haven't already covered extensively here in the last 12 minutes. We've got a far left government in Mexico. Corruption is rife in that country. They're dealing with some real internal problems, some real challenges on law enforcement, and I'm concerned that our southern neighbor is going to be much less stable than it has been for the last 20 or 30 years.
Problems at our border are not going away anytime soon, are they?
Right.
Les Munson is a partner principal at BGR Group in the Guidacy in Washington, D.C. That's all I'm going to tell you. We learned so much as we talk to you, Les. Thanks for being on with us.
Always a pleasure, Michael.
That's it, folks, for another FarrCast as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Remember that everything we've discussed today does have a market and economic implication. The consumer is still holding in and doing okay. The U.S. economy is still growing. Inflation is indeed coming down, which means prices are moving up at a slower rate. The Fed has changed course. That's the most important thing I think we look at here in the next weeks and months ahead. A lot of these other things are distractions, but some of them will have some very long-term consequences. Middle East, China, maybe not as much Ukraine, but we can't watch Putin become too much of a bully there either. We'll be back next week. We're going to do it all again. For Harry Jennings, our producer, everybody at Hightower Advisors in Farr, Miller, and Washington, thanks. Please share us on your social media in Washington, D.C. I'm Michael Farr. See you next week.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the FarrCast. Thanks to this week's guest, Jim Iuorio, Dan Mahaffee, and special guest, Les Munson. And thanks to you, our listeners. We hope you enjoy the show as much as we enjoy making it for you. Please share us with friends and colleagues. The FarrCast is produced by Michael Farr and Harry Jennings and comes to you weekly for free on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, TuneIn, and Apple Podcasts. Please be aware that anytime we or any of our guests mention a specific company, sector, or refer to performance in relation to an earnings report, news headline, or economic trend, it's not a recommendation to buy or sell. Review the risks and rewards of any investment with your financial advisor for what specific investment and general strategy is appropriate for you before you make any investment decision. As always, if we can be of assistance at Farr, Miller, in Washington, please reach out to me at hjennings@farrmiller.com. We are here to help, and I'm happy to arrange for any of our listeners an appointment with one of our financial professionals to review your portfolio, your needs, and your goals. We love reading all of your notes, and we try to reply to as many as we can. You can reach us at hjennings@farrmiller.com. Let us know any questions you have about past episodes or questions you'd like us to address as we continue into Season 8. Take care, stay safe, and stay healthy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for listening to the FarrCast. Wall Street, Washington, and the world. Farr, Miller in Washington is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. All information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Farr, Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC have not independently verified the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Farr, Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. Farr, Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to the information. This podcast and the materials contained herein were created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates. Farr, Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented in any way to any entity as tax or legal advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisors for related questions.